In this short tutorial, we're going to download publicly available data that estimates relative wealth within countries. Then we'll use a free online tool called Unfolded to visualize relative wealth in Togo and share our findings with the world. We'll be using a dataset from Facebook's Data for Good program called the Relative Wealth Index. If you haven't already, make sure you watch the intro video to learn more about Data for Good and its privacy-preserving datasets. Derived from a combination of non-traditional sources like satellite imagery and connectivity data, and ground truth by traditional demographic and health surveys, these insights help us answer questions like, how is wealth distributed across the country? And where should I direct my resources if I'm looking to serve poorer communities? We've already seen this data being used in the real world. 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗲𝗿𝗏, a charity that provides cash transfers to people to help them climb out of poverty, used the Relative Wealth Index to inform their decisions on which people and areas to send their money to in Togo. There, they identified tens of thousands of people to send a total of $5 million to over a period of 5 months. Although not a perfect indicator of poverty or wealth, the Relative Wealth Index helped 𝗥𝗲𝗳𝗏 identify where to send their limited resources. Check out the link in the description to follow this case study more closely. And in the meantime, let's get started. So we're going to get started by downloading our data from the Humanitarian Data Exchange, where Facebook's Data for Good program publicly shares many datasets and insights. Once you get there, search for the Relative Wealth Index, and you'll find a series of files under the Facebook organization page. Essentially, this is listed as individual files for many different countries, but you can just go ahead and download the first one, which is the Relative Wealth Index for all 93 low and middle income countries that it's available for. Go ahead and click download, and we can start looking at the data. Now, once you've downloaded the file, it'll be a zip file, so you can unzip that and open the folder, and you'll see dozens of files inside of different CSV files. Inside that folder, you'll find a CSV file or a spreadsheet file for each one of the countries articulated by its 3-digit code. Let's go ahead and open up the one for Togo, which is TGO, and check that out in Excel. So when you open the file, you'll see it's really clean and really easy to use. There are a few thousand rows, so it should be able to open pretty easily, and you basically only have 4 different columns worth looking at. The first one is the quad key. Now the quad key, generally speaking, refers to a specific 2.4 square kilometer tile in the world. This is based off of Microsoft Bing tiles. It's basically a unique identifier for each one of these tiles. The latitude and longitude is the center point, a coordinate at the center of each one of those tiles. And RWI, as it would suggest, is the actual indexed value of the Relative Wealth Index. Now it's important to mention that this dataset shows relative wealth within the country. So you can't really compare between countries, but within a specific country, these numbers are normalized and adjusted to be relative within that country. And then you also have an error rate too, which is really important to look at, especially if you're going to make meaningful, potentially life-changing or life-influencing decisions from this data. Make sure you look at the error range as well to ensure that you're making accurate insights and interpreting this thing well. But now that we understand the data, let's pop it into one of my favorite online tools to visualize this on a map and see what the disparity or the distribution of relative wealth looks like in Togo. So I'd love to introduce you now to one of my favorite new tools that I've recently discovered called Unfolded. Now Unfolded is a company that provides access to a geospatial tool that's very similar to 𝗥𝗲𝗄. Now if you haven't heard of 𝗥𝗲𝗄, check out some of my other tutorials here where we talk about the online tool 𝗥𝗲𝗄. But you can get started at unfolded.ai and log in. Now you do need to make an account to use this. There are free accounts, and what that lets you do is do things like save your work or your projects, or produce public links that you can share with others so they can follow along on the maps that you've been making. Now once you log in, you'll have basically a series of maps in your projects, and you want to go to the top right and create new map, that purple button there. Once you do that, you will see an interface that looks somewhat familiar to what you would have seen if you've used the tool 𝗥𝗲𝗄 in our other tutorials. And we're going to start off by adding our data to this web page. So we have our upload window here, and we can upload different file formats that we need. In our case, CSV is how the data set came, so we'll just drag our Togo Relative Wealth Index file over to the data. Once it's in there, you'll see it listed here. You can add multiple if you need to. In our case, we'll just add data by clicking right there. We'll just give it a second to visualize and parse this information. You can see right away it's plotted these points on a map. We're at Togo right now. And I'm going to make a couple of different changes here to style this. Now with Unfolded, just to walk you through the interface, on the left-hand side is really where you're going to be doing a lot of your configuration and your settings through these different tabs here, ranging from layers and filters to interactions and base map. But first, let's take a look at the left where we can see our data set has been added here. And it's also automatically created a layer from that data set. So we'll click that drop-down arrow to manipulate its settings. So once we extend our layer down, we can see lots of different parameters to customize that layer. A lot of the ones that we care about have already been automatically figured out by the software. So it's going to be using points, and it's going to be using our latitude and longitude fields to figure out where to put those points. If you hit this drop down next to fill color, you can see that it's already pre-selected the RWI to base the color on, which means that the color of each dot will depend on the value of the RWI, or the relative wealth index. In this case, I'm happy with the color scale. Our dark purple here will imply that it's a negative or a low relative wealth, and yellow means higher value or higher relative wealth. We'll make a couple of other small aesthetic or cosmetic changes here. I'm going to put on an outline for each one of these dots. I'm just going to make it a white outline, just like that. Make it a small width. And let's make our radius really big. We'll be zooming in here in a little bit, so I want to make it a 40 sized radius. And the last thing I do is up at the top, we were manipulating the layers, but we'll jump over to our base map, and let's just get a nice kind of muted light base map here so we can really focus on the data. So we're actually doing a pretty good job already to visualize what was, a few minutes ago, a bunch of different spreadsheets and thousands of rows within that spreadsheet. Here what you can see is very quickly some patterns that are worth looking at. Before getting into those, I want to point your attention to the top right, where we can actually change this to view the map in 3D. Now this is a small feature that I kind of enjoy for certain contexts, particularly if you want to make this visually compelling and pretty interesting. This 3D feature is useful. Now here, as you can see right away, we can see pockets of relative wealth and relative poverty. So clearly by the coast here, we see a lot of yellow here, and if we mouse over, we can see relative wealth that's somewhat higher than others. And if we go to the darker colors, we start seeing much lower relative wealth, and for a wide geographic disparity around this country. You can also move on further inland, where we see pockets of relative wealth highlighted by yellow. And again, it's really important to mention a couple things here. First, this is relative wealth, so it only depends on other values within that country. And secondly, over in our fill color, when we chose our color scale, we're using a quantile color scale, and there are different options there. So we already have, like I mentioned, some really fascinating insights here. Now, one thing that you can do with Unfolded here is create a little bit of a filter to only see those outliers, maybe those areas of really high relative wealth or really low relative wealth. So clicking on our Filters tab here, we'll click Add Filter, and let's select our RWI filter here. And you can see it gives you a little distribution about relative wealth, and you can see it's really stacked towards, negative numbers here. Then you can start using these white bars to drag a bit. And if we drag it this way, we're getting just now those few areas. You can see the dots begin to disappear. And we'll zoom out here to see really those few areas of really relatively high wealth relative to other areas in the country. And you can see again that strong concentration near the coast. So it's a really useful tool, this filter, to zoom in, again, both from the higher end and also the lower end, to see where there are areas of relatively low relative wealth that require much more attention potentially. So at this stage, we're ready to share our visualization. I'll go ahead and expand this filter so we can see everything. Then I'll just quickly maybe rename this as RWI Togo. This is a great feature here. Unfolded automatically saves your work as you're doing it, so giving it a title is always very helpful. And then over on the left-hand side, we have a few options of how we might share these insights. The quickest one is to export. You can just export an image, which you're welcome to try. When I do that, I often use the 2x resolution feature, so I can print this out if I need to, and download this file for easy sharing or putting into a presentation. But Unfolded also has another feature, because they're providing a service where they can actually host this map and you can publish it. When you publish a map, obviously it's available to anyone who has the URL, so you want to be careful here. And it's really useful to embed in blogs or websites. So here I'll add a description, a tutorial, video, map for here, and underneath here, we might just choose a few options. For instance, we'll collapse the map information, but make sure that our map legend is visible. We'll collapse our side panel and we'll hit publish. Now once we do that, we'll get a unique URL that we can share with absolutely anyone, and we can share it with them and they won't need to sign in to be able to view this themselves. So I'll show you what that looks like here. I'll open up that link. You can imagine sending this to a colleague, a coworker, or someone interested in this insight for them to explore the data themselves. And what a big transformation this really is from the CSV files that we downloaded only a few minutes ago to an interactive visual that you or others can explore to understand relative wealth in a country. So the Relative Wealth Index is a truly fascinating data set that answers fundamental questions about our world. Where wealth is distributed, where it isn't. Its hyper-granularity is also a huge asset. But without easy-to-use tools like Unfolded, it would have been really hard for non-technical specialists to make sense of it. But instead, we were able to quickly design a custom map from this data, identify hotspots of relative wealth, and package that up neatly for someone else to consume. What a great transformation. And there we have it. If you're looking for more tutorials like this, check out the playlist link in the video description below. There, you'll also find important resources, including links to the case study that I mentioned earlier, as well as the methodology behind this Data for Good dataset. And before you go, please help us to improve these tutorials. Take the short survey at the link that you see on your screen to let us know your thoughts about this tutorial and how you might use these insights. We'll see you soon.